What if the quietest person on a luxury flight held the power to shake an entire airline? What if a simple request for water revealed something far deeper? About dignity, about silence, about who we choose to see, and who we overlook. This isn't just another story about discrimination. It's about a seat, a stare, and a moment that changed everything. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The San Francisco International Airport was buzzing, like it always was at that hour. Polished shoes clacking on marble floors, hushed conversations behind designer sunglasses, the occasional cough from a tired traveler clutching their third coffee. But tucked in the far corner of the Aerolux Atlantic VIP lounge, everything felt slower, quieter, cooler. The lighting was soft and amber, like a hotel lobby trying too hard. People didn't just sit there, they posed. Mavis Renaud didn't pose. She sat with her back straight, cardigan neat over her shoulders, eyes gently scanning the pages of a worn hardcover. A simple carry-on rested by her legs. No logos, no rhinestones. Just clean. The way she liked it. No one in the lounge paid her much attention, at least not directly. But a few glances lingered too long. A couple whispered. One man gave that look she'd seen too many times, half curiosity, half suspicion. Still, Mavis turned a page, unbothered. She didn't need their approval to exist in that space. That much she'd earned over 70 quiet, deliberate years. When the boarding call echoed, she rose smoothly. No rush, no fumble. Just grace. She walked past rows of tailored suits and diamond-studded wrists, and presented her ticket with a calm that made the young attendant blink. First class. Row 1. Seat A. The flight attendant gave a brief nod. Not warm, not cold. Just enough. The cabin smelled like leather and citrus cleaner. Classical music played faintly in the background. The kind that never really had a melody, just notes floating nowhere. Mavis settled into her seat, placing the book on her lap. She glanced out the oval window. Clouds. Still low. The wing like a long silver blade beside her. Across the aisle in 1C, a young man with locks tucked under a knit cap glanced at her, nodded politely, and returned to his phone. He couldn't have been older than 25. Wore headphones, but wasn't listening to anything yet. Mavis could tell. He was alert, in that quiet way certain young men are when the world's taught them to stay ready. Then came the stewardess, blonde, mid-40s, flawless makeup, perfect posture. Her name tag said Hollis. She swept through the cabin, offering welcome drinks, like she was gliding through a ballroom. Champagne? Still or sparkling? Her voice floated sweetly. Mavis offered a soft smile. Still water, please. Hollis blinked once, then continued down the row without a word. No nod. No acknowledgement. Just pass by. Mavis said nothing. She folded her hands over the book and waited. A few moments later, the same drinks cart returned, this time with Hollis pausing at each seat. Sparkling water for the woman in 1B. Scotch for the man in 2A. Nothing for 1A. Jalen, the young man in 1C, shifted slightly in his seat. His eyes flicked from the cart to Mavis, then back to Hollis. Something didn't feel right. Mavis waited until Hollis returned again, this time to take meal preferences. When the attendant leaned over to speak with 1B, Mavis pressed the service button. Hollis turned, one brow raised. Yes. Just water, Mavis said. Still, if you have it. A pause. Hollis looked her up and down. Then that smile came, the kind that wasn't a smile at all. I think you'll need to be patient, ma'am. This is first class, and people like you might not be familiar with how things work up here. There it was. Not loud. Not blatant, but clear as glass. Jalen sat straighter in his seat. He wasn't sure what he expected. Maybe a quiet apology, maybe for the older woman to bristle or raise her voice. But Mavis just nodded once. Calm. Her fingers gripped the armrest, but her expression stayed smooth. Composed. That'll be fine, she replied softly. Thank you. Hollis turned without another word and rolled her cart away. Jalen leaned back, exhaled slowly. He looked over at the woman beside him. She hadn't opened her book again, just stared out the window like the clouds held answers no one else could read. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, not to record. Not yet. Just to take a note. A time. A name. Hollis Brent. Seat 1A. Water incident. For 12 p.m. On Mavis's lap, the book sat open. Its title etched in gold on the cover. On Dignity and Quietness. The letters shimmered under the overhead light. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. She wasn't waiting for someone to defend her. She wasn't trying to win an argument. She was just sitting still like a stone in a rushing river, unmoved, unmoving. Not because she didn't know how to fight, but because she knew exactly when to. The plane had leveled off into a calm, quiet cruise. The hum of the engines settled into the background, like an old tune you don't really hear until it stops. Overhead lights dimmed, window shades halfway down. The cabin lulled into that suspended time between departure and destination. It was the kind of hush that made even the clink of ice in a glass feel like a shout. Mavis leaned her head gently against the seat. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to steady herself. She knew this feeling. The weight. The quiet tension hanging in the air like thick fog. It wasn't the altitude. It was the room. The space. How it pressed against her, not physically, but in that silent way people make you feel like you don't belong. She'd known this feeling since she was a girl. Her mind drifted back to a diner in Mississippi. Summer heat, so thick it blurred the edges of buildings. She was 13, dressed in her Sunday best, walking beside her father. They'd stepped into the cool air of the diner only to be told, with a tight smile and a glance at their skin, takeout only. She remembered looking up at her father, confused and small, waiting for him to raise his voice. But he didn't. He just placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You don't need to prove anything to them, baby. You just need to remember who you are." The sting of that day never fully faded. Now, decades later, sitting in seat 1A, she felt that same invisible shove. Different tone. Same insult. The meal service had begun. Silver carts rolled down the aisle. Attendants smiling like they were on stage, offering carefully plated dishes with linen napkins folded just right. Hollis moved briskly, checking names against a list, nodding at each passenger, until she reached Mavis. She barely glanced her way. "Ma'am," Mavis said gently, keeping her voice low. Hollis paused, pretending to check her tablet. "Did you request a meal when you booked?" "I believe so," Mavis replied. "Well, it's not marked here. I can check what's left, but there may not be options." Then she moved on. From across the aisle, a man leaned slightly toward Hollis, his voice hushed but audible. He wore a sport coat, wedding band, that practiced air of casual authority. "Is she in the right section?" Hollis smiled, tilting her head just enough for condescension to drip through. "I was wondering the same thing." Jalen, still in 1C, caught it all. He didn't say a word, but he shifted in his seat. His phone was already unlocked in his lap. 10 minutes passed. No meal came. And then the cabin door opened again. A man stepped in, not rushed, not flustered, just late in the way important people are allowed to be. Gray sport coat over a turtleneck, no tie, a soft leather briefcase in hand. His expression was unreadable, sharp, but quiet. Cashin Renaud. He offered a nod to the attendant, took his seat in 2A without ceremony. His eyes swept the cabin once. When they reached Mavis, they paused for just a second, too brief to mean anything to anyone watching, too long to mean nothing. She didn't react. Her hands rested on the book again. Cashin unfolded his tray table, took the menu with a soft thank you. As Hollis approached with a bottle of wine, he asked plainly, "Has the woman in 1A been served yet?" Hollis's posture shifted, like someone realizing they missed a step. "I don't believe she had a pre-selected meal." Cashin raised an eyebrow. "She's seated in 1A. "Yes, sir, but—" "That's not how Aerolux does service," he interrupted, calm but clipped. "Not on this route. Not for that seat." His eyes held hers for a second too long. Hollis stiffened, nodded, and turned back to the galley without another word. Jalen's eyebrows lifted slightly. He glanced toward Mavis, who was still looking out the window. If she heard any of it, she didn't show it. She hadn't touched the call button again. She hadn't complained. She simply waited. Cashin said nothing more, but his fingers tapped once on the table. Once, and then stopped. There was a tension now. Not chaos, but a slow, rising awareness. Like when a storm is still far enough away that no one panics, but close enough that everyone feels it in their ribs. Mavis blinked slowly. Her reflection in the window looked back at her, softened by the curve of the glass. She didn't need the meal. She'd had a small breakfast. But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about the food. It never had been. It was about being made invisible in a room full of people who pretended to see everything. Cashin sipped his water slowly, watching nothing in particular. Hollis disappeared to the back of the cabin, and Jalen finally opened his camera app. Not to record. Not yet. But ready. Just in case. Cashin leaned back in his seat, folding the menu and setting it on the tray table. His face gave nothing away, but there was a small tightness at the corner of his mouth, the kind that only shows up when something sits wrong. Without saying another word, he turned his gaze toward the window and let the matter be, for now. Hollis returned a minute later. Her steps were sharper. No trace of the hostess' smile now. She approached a water bottle in hand, and without meeting Mavis's eyes, set it down on the tray table with a force just shy of rude. The bottle rattled against the metal with a dull thud. There, Hollis muttered. Jalen, sitting diagonally across, caught the entire motion. His hand moved slowly, lifting his phone again, this time with intent. No flash. No sound. Just a quiet recording from the side of his leg. The camera caught Mavis's stillness, the water bottle, and the retreating back of the flight attendant. Mavis didn't react. Not at first. Her fingers brushed over the condensation on the bottle. Cool. Sweating. Like her palms, only steadier. She glanced at the label. Nothing fancy. Nothing meant to offend. But the way it was given told a different story. 2 rows back, a man in a gray blazer leaned toward the aisle and flagged down a passing attendant. "Excuse me," he said, lowering his voice. "I hate to ask, but would it be possible to move seats? I'm just not comfortable with my current placement." The attendant blinked. "You're in 1B, sir. Right next to the window. Is there an issue?" He offered a vague smile and a shrug. "I'd just prefer somewhere quieter." A few beats passed. Hollis appeared, quick to smooth things over. "We understand," she said, voice crisp. "Let me see what's available in the rear cabin." Then she turned to Mavis, forcing a polite tone. "If you're feeling out of place, ma'am, I believe we do have seats in the back that might suit you better." There it was, delivered softly, with the kind of voice you use when suggesting a better view or a cozier blanket. But the meaning hit like a slap. Mavis raised her eyes. Slowly. Her gaze met Hollis's and didn't waver. "I'm just fine where I am." It wasn't defiant. It wasn't angry. Just still. But inside, her chest tightened. The words, the tone, the suggestion, everything about it peeled back a layer of time she'd hoped had long since healed. Suddenly, she was 19 again, riding a train through Georgia, pulled aside by a conductor who told her, with the same polished civility, that she'd need to sit in the rear car. It was just the rules. It was always just the rules. Her fingers curled around the book in her lap, not because she was going to read, but because she needed something to hold on to. Hollis walked away without pushing further, but the damage lingered like the stale scent of old coffee. Cashin watched from 2 rows back. He didn't speak, but something shifted in his expression. His eyes weren't just watching now, they were assessing. He tapped his call button. Another attendant, a younger woman, softer features, approached. "I need a passenger list," he said, "including seat assignments." The attendant hesitated. "Is there something wrong, sir?" "I'm attending a meeting with your executive team this afternoon," he said, voice steady but firm. "I'd prefer to have complete information." She blinked, uncertain. "You're with?" "Renault Ventures." The name landed like a dropped pin. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, sir. I'll get that for you right away." Cashin gave a short nod. He didn't glance at Mavis again. Didn't need to. Everything he needed to know was already settled. The cabin settled into a quiet lull. Meal trays were cleared. Lights dimmed just a little more. The engine's hum seemed louder now, stretching over the silence like a wool blanket. The plane hit a small pocket of turbulence. Nothing serious, but just enough to jolt a few glasses and draw some glances upward. Mavis didn't move. She picked up the water bottle with steady hands, unscrewed the cap, and took a small sip. Her eyes never left the back of the seat in front of her. Her spine remained straight. She wasn't here to cause a scene. She wasn't looking for sympathy. But in that moment, she became something bigger than herself. A quiet figure holding her place in a space that had tried, gently but persistently, to erase her from it. She didn't resist with noise. She resisted by staying still. And sometimes that's enough. The plane flew steady, cruising over the soft blanket of clouds like nothing was wrong down below. But inside that cabin, everything had shifted. The air wasn't still anymore. It hummed with something unspoken, like tension bottled up and ready to spill. Jalen sat frozen for a moment after he stopped recording. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he tapped share. Not publicly, just a direct message. He sent the video to his girlfriend, who worked in PR for a mid-sized media firm in Chicago. Along with the video, he added one line. "Does this look bad enough to go viral?" A few minutes passed before her reply popped up. "Wait, hold up. Is that Mavis Renaud?" He stared at the screen, blinking. Then another message came in, faster this time. "That's Cashin, Renaud's mother. You're literally sitting next to the mother of the guy trying to buy half the damn airline." Jalen let out a slow breath and glanced across the aisle at Mavis, who was still sitting quietly, her hands resting on the armrests. She hadn't shifted an inch, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't even looked angry. She just looked planted, like an old tree that had survived too many storms to sway now. Back in 2A, Cashin's phone buzzed. He read the message from his communications advisor, eyes scanning the thumbnail of the clip already making its way across private circles. He hadn't wanted this to become a headline. He hadn't wanted the meeting that afternoon to turn into damage control. But things were moving fast, faster than he'd hoped. He typed a message and hit send. Prep a crisis comms plan. Just in case this clip goes wide. Include a personal statement option. Then he locked his phone, slowly placed it face down, and looked up. There was a fork in the road now. Either he stayed silent to protect the deal, or he stepped forward and risked making it personal. He rubbed the back of his neck. The decision had been made long before the plane took off. Meanwhile, Mavis sat still. Her book was open again, but she wasn't reading it. She was listening to the voices, the whispers just loud enough to reach her. From a galley, Hollis leaned in to one of the junior attendants, her voice low and sharp. "I don't care who she thinks she is. That kind of attitude doesn't belong in first class." The other woman didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "She hasn't said a word, Hollis." "She doesn't have to," Hollis snapped. "It's the way she looks at people." The younger attendant didn't push back. She just turned away, biting her lip. Maybe it was shame. Maybe fear. Mavis hadn't heard every word, but she'd heard enough. She could feel it, like a ripple in her bones. She'd lived through decades of coded language and careful cruelty. She didn't need subtitles to understand what people really meant. And it wasn't just about her. If she got up and moved to the back, the woman in 3C might think twice before sitting up front next time. If she stayed quiet, the girl in 5B would learn what happened when you didn't shrink yourself to fit the room. She wasn't trying to make a point. She was the point. Her fingers touched the edge of her book, but her eyes were fixed forward. She thought, "If I bend now, it tells them someone like me should always bend." Back in row 2, Cashin pressed the call button again. A different attendant came over, one he hadn't spoken to yet. "I need the lead attendant," he said. "Now." "Yes, sir." "Is there a problem?" "No," he said. "But there's going to be." The attendant nodded and walked briskly toward the front. Cashin stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked slowly down the aisle toward seat 1A. The plane gave a small jolt as the descent began. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker overhead. reminding passengers to stay seated and fasten their belts. Nobody paid attention. In that quiet, the real storm was still coming. One not made of wind or turbulence, but of reckoning. The hush in the cabin had grown heavier, though no one said anything out loud. Mavis felt it in her bones, that quiet discomfort when people don't know how to look at you, so they either stare too long or not at all. Her presence had unsettled something in them. It wasn't her words, she'd hardly spoken. It wasn't even what she wore or how she carried herself. It was simply that she was still there, in that seat, upright, composed, unmoved. Her eyes wandered the cabin. A woman with a designer scarf was pretending to scroll her phone, but kept glancing Mavis's way. A man in row 3 whispered something to a seatmate, careful to keep his voice low, but not too low. Even Jalen, across the aisle, looked up more often now, as if making sure she was still all right. Mavis breathed slowly through her nose, eyes drifting back to the clouds outside the window. Somewhere beneath them was a world that had never quite made room for her, and never quite stopped asking her to make herself smaller. Her thoughts moved back in time, as they always did when the pressure built. She remembered being called the help when she showed up at a parent-teacher meeting in her best suit. She remembered standing in the back during Cashin's college graduation, because only 2 VIP tickets were allowed per family, and his father's boss had asked to attend. They told her there were no extra seats. She had smiled anyway, applauded anyway, because she was his mother, and that was enough. But sitting in seat 1A, now decades later, Mavis wondered, how many more times would she have to let the moment pass, let the insult slide, for the world to move forward even a step? How many times was enough? A shadow passed beside her. It was Hollis again. No tray this time. No food or drinks. Just a clipboard and an agenda to assert. Masks are still required during descent, ma'am, Hollis said, voice clipped. Mavis turned slightly. She glanced around. The man in 1B was sipping from a cup with his mask pulled below his chin. Another in 2C had his mask hanging from one ear while he watched a movie. But they weren't being spoken to. Only her. She didn't argue. She didn't sigh or roll her eyes. She just reached into her purse, took out her mask, and slid it over her face with slow, deliberate care. Thank you, she said softly. Hollis didn't reply. She just moved on. It was so small, so routine. But it wasn't lost on anyone watching. Jalen sat forward again. His hand hovered over the record button on his phone. Meanwhile, several rows back, Cashin's phone buzzed. He glanced down and saw the name of his assistant. The message was short. It's out. He tapped the link. A local news outlet had just posted an article. Black woman denied service in first class, identified as mother of Aerolux's lead investor. The video embedded below the headline was shaky, but clear enough. The water bottle. The comment about people like you. The stewardess's face visible in profile. And Mavis. Silent. Still. Cashin read the headline again. Then he looked up. There was no pulling back now. He turned toward the aisle, made eye contact with the closest attendant, and gestured with 2 fingers. I need to speak with your lead attendant, he said. Now. The attendant looked startled, but nodded. Right away, sir. Cashin stood, straightened his blazer, and began to walk slowly toward the front of the cabin. Every movement deliberate. Every step grounded in something deeper than anger. Mavis didn't move. She had heard the footsteps. She could feel the energy shifting around her. But her gaze remained outside, watching clouds drift like slow waves. Whatever was coming, she had already made peace with it. She thought, not for the first time. If today's the day something breaks, then let it break while I'm sitting right here. Because you can only hold the door open so long before you have to decide. Are you stepping through or letting it slam shut behind you? And she'd had too many doors closed in her face to stay quiet one more time. Cashin moved to the front of the cabin with a kind of composure that didn't need to announce itself. He wasn't hurried. He wasn't grand. But everyone noticed. The murmur of conversations faded. Even the low hum of the plane seemed to dull beneath the weight of his presence. Hollis stood by the galley wall, shoulders square, clipboard clutched like a shield. Her chin was slightly lifted, but her eyes gave her away, no longer sharp, no longer sure. She saw Cashin coming, and she knew what was coming with him. He stopped just short of her, left a respectful distance between them, not out of fear, but out of something more deliberate. Restraint. "You know who she is, don't you?" he asked, voice low, steady. Hollis blinked. There was a pause, just a fraction too long. "I treat every passenger based on their behavior," she replied. Her tone clipped. "Not on who their relatives are." Cashin studied her for a moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Is that so?" The calm in his voice was sharper than anger. She opened her mouth, but no words came. "You know," he said, voice softer now, "my mother taught me a lot of things. How to show up early. How to speak with clarity. How to be firm without being cruel. But most of all, she taught me what dignity looks like. It's not in what you wear. It's not in the title on your badge. It's in how you treat people when no one's watching." He stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to be sure every word landed exactly where it needed to. "She never asked for special treatment. She didn't mention my name. She didn't flash a card or make a scene. All she did was sit in the seat she paid for and ask for water. And you treated her, like it cost you something." Hollis's face had lost its color. The confidence she wore so easily earlier had slipped. In its place was a kind of rigid defensiveness, like a statue cracking beneath heat. Cashin turned slightly and addressed the flight attendant standing behind him. "Please begin logging a full report of the interaction between this attendant and my mother. I want timestamps, witness statements, everything." "Yes, sir," the attendant said, already tapping on a company-issued tablet. Then, from the middle of the cabin, a quiet voice broke the silence. "Excuse me." Every head turned. An elderly man stood slowly, balancing himself with the edge of a seat. Neatly dressed, wedding ring glinting in the light. He looked straight at Hollis. "I've flown this route for over 20 years, he said. "I mind my own business. But I saw what happened today, and I can't stay quiet." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "She didn't do anything wrong. You decided she didn't belong before she even opened her mouth. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want to cause trouble. But now, I regret that." A hush hung in the air. Then, from the back of first class, a woman in a navy blazer raised her voice. "She's right. I saw it too." Another voice followed. This wasn't service. This was something else. Hollis glanced around, her eyes scanning the faces. But there was no rescue coming. No agreement. No one to back her up. She was standing in a room full of people, and she was alone. Mavis, still seated in 1A, hadn't moved. She sat with the same quiet grace she had when the flight began, back straight, hands resting on her lap. But the moment had found her. Everything unspoken was now spoken for her. A soft voice came from her left. It was one of the younger flight attendants, early 20s, maybe, nervous, eyes glassy. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have said something earlier. I saw it all." Mavis turned her head, meeting the girl's eyes with kindness, not softness, but kindness that came from knowing too well what it meant to be silent when it mattered most. "You still can," Mavis said. "You've got time. Don't waste it." The young woman blinked, then nodded, as if something had shifted inside her, something she wouldn't forget. Cashin turned back to Hollis one last time. "I'm not canceling our investment because of this flight," he said, voice even. "But I am reevaluating it because of what this flight revealed." He let the weight of that hang in the air. "I'm not just looking at numbers anymore. I'm looking at the culture. The kind that trains people to look away, to stay quiet, to believe their discomfort is more important than someone else's dignity." He took one final breath. "That's what's changing. Starting today." Then, without another word, he walked back down the aisle, past the other passengers, past the quiet gasps, past the weight of history that had pressed on that cabin like a storm. He never looked back. The plane began its slow descent, the cabin lights adjusting to a softer tone as passengers shifted in their seats and gathered their things. The energy had changed. Not chaotic, not loud, just different. Like everyone suddenly realized they'd all been part of something larger than their boarding passes and carry-ons. Hollis moved slowly down the aisle, clipboard now tucked under her arm. Her shoulders no longer squared, her steps unsure. She paused at seat 1A. Mavis looked up, not with curiosity, not with anger, just quiet awareness. Hollis hesitated, then leaned slightly closer and said, in a hushed voice meant only for Mavis, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." It wasn't a full apology. Not really. And her eyes, though cast downward, held no weight of reflection, just discomfort. Mavis didn't blink. She looked her in the face and replied, clear and steady, "I don't need your apology. What I need is for you to understand why this should never have happened." Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The words landed with more force than any shouting ever could. Hollis straightened up but said nothing. She walked away slowly, disappearing into the galley without looking back. Mavis turned her head again toward the window. Boston was beginning to take shape beneath the clouds, rivers cutting through the land like veins, brick rooftops glinting in the afternoon sun. The city looked calm from above, unaware of the ripple that was already moving through its airport. When the wheels touched the tarmac, a soft cheer came from a few passengers in the back. The cabin lights flickered back to full brightness. Seat belts clicked open. Cell phones buzzed alive. Cashin didn't move right away. He waited, watching the aisle clear little by little. At the terminal, a group of sharply dressed Aerolux representatives waited near the gate exit. Their eyes found Cashin instantly, and one of them, a man in a blue blazer too tight at the shoulders, stepped forward with a nervous smile. "We've arranged a private lounge if you'd like to speak, Mr. Renaud." "We saw the news." Cashin didn't smile back. "You saw it," he said. "Then you know what happens next depends on you." He didn't offer a handshake, just walked past them, not hurried but with purpose. The group followed. Inside the lounge, quiet and slick with brushed metal and glass, a few executives were already on a video call. Their voices were tense, apologetic, rehearsed. That night, a memo went out to every Aerolux employee. It was marked urgent and mandatory. All flight crew will undergo comprehensive retraining on service equity and cultural sensitivity, beginning next week. The press caught wind before midnight. Headlines circled through media outlets faster than the PR team could soften them. Investor's mother discriminated on flight. Quiet passenger, loud message. Cashin Renaud demands change after mistreatment of mother. And then came the think pieces. Articles describing Mavis as a symbol of grace under pressure, the woman who didn't flinch, a lesson in dignity. Social media lit up, not with outrage alone, but with admiration, even awe. Her silence had become its own kind of power. Civil rights organizations joined in, calling for Aerolux to release full transparency reports on staffing, complaints, and internal handling of discrimination cases. What began as a single ignored request for water had become a mirror, and the reflection wasn't pretty. Later that evening, as Cashin walked beside his mother through the terminal, he gestured toward a waiting black car just outside. "I had a car sent for you. It's ready." But Mavis shook her head. "I'd rather walk." He looked at her, a little puzzled. She smiled gently and said, "I need to feel what it's like to walk through this airport. Every step. I need to remember." Cashin didn't ask why. He just walked beside her quietly. It wasn't about claiming victory. It wasn't even about closure. It was about honoring the ground she stood on and the ground she refused to back down from. Step by step, she walked forward. Not for recognition, but for every time she'd been told to step aside. It didn't take long for the headlines to shift from whispers to thunder. Within days of the flight landing in Boston, Aerolux Atlantic was in full crisis mode. A press conference was announced with barely 24 hours notice. Reporters from every major outlet showed up, expecting spin. What they got, instead, was something close to accountability. Standing behind a sleek podium, the CEO, tie loosened, voice tense, read from a prepared statement. Behind him, the company's branding gleamed like polished metal. "We acknowledge a serious lapse in service and culture," he began. What happened to Ms. Mavis Renaud on Flight 217 was not just unfortunate, it was unacceptable. And it wasn't isolated. It revealed something we can no longer ignore. He paused. Cameras clicked. Microphones inched closer. Sometimes, one small moment can reveal a much larger illness within a system. And that means we have to make real change. It wasn't perfect, but it was public. Hollis Brent, whose name had already gone viral, was placed on administrative leave pending internal review. Within the week, she was dismissed, her exit statement buried between bulletins about service upgrades and policy overhauls. A few local reporters caught up with her outside her condo. Tears streaked her cheeks as she held up a hand and said, "I didn't think I was being discriminatory. I just reacted based on what I saw, based on how she acted." But no one seemed to buy it. Not anymore. Because by then, it wasn't just about one stewardess. It was about a pattern, a culture, one that too many had excused for too long. And the spotlight didn't let her hide. Meanwhile, in a modest home tucked into the hills of Oakland, Mavis Renaud sat on her front porch, sipping tea as the sun began to dip behind the rooftops. The house had been hers for 40 years. The neighborhood hadn't always welcomed her. She still remembered the neighbor who asked if she was the new housekeeper when she moved in. That man had moved out long ago. She stayed. Earlier that day, a group of college students had come by, journalism majors from a local university. They wanted an interview, a full feature for their campus paper. "We'd love to record your version," the young woman with a curly ponytail said. "Your words could help so many people." Mavis had smiled, soft but firm. "You can write about it," she said. "But don't write me like a victim. If you tell my story, make sure it moves people to act, not just feel sorry." They nodded, grateful, inspired, a little overwhelmed. Later that evening, Cashin arrived, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder, his tie undone like he'd finally let himself breathe. They sat in the backyard under the lemon tree, the same one Cashin used to climb as a boy when he wanted to get away from homework. He poured her a second cup of tea and asked, "Would it have bothered you if I'd said something sooner? On the plane, I mean." She looked at him, her eyes kind, not soft. "No," she said. "But if you had stayed quiet your whole life, that would have broken my heart." He nodded, eyes wet but steady. They didn't say much after that. Just sat side by side as the cicadas began to hum. By the end of the week, the video clip had found a second life. But this time, people weren't sharing it out of outrage. They were sharing it with captions like strength, grace, and the quiet voice that shook the system. A magazine wrote a feature titled, "The Woman in 1A." It ended with a simple sentence. "Sometimes, the person who stays seated is the one who makes everyone else stand up." And across the country, in a small-town library tucked between a gas station and a thrift store, a young woman sat at a public computer reading that same article. Her flight was booked for next week, her first work trip. She checked the economy box without thinking. But after reading about Mavis Renaud, she closed the tab, logged into her airline account, and quietly upgraded her ticket. Not because she wanted champagne or a bigger seat, but because she realized, maybe for the first time, that she belonged up front too. She didn't know Mavis, but Mavis had left something behind anyway. Sometimes it doesn't take shouting to change a room. It just takes staying seated when the world expects you to move. Mavis never asked for recognition, but by holding her ground with quiet strength, she reminded us all what dignity looks like when it's tested. What would you have done in her seat? If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that deserve to be heard.